I'm a freelance user researcher. I'm basically a gun for hire. What I want to do today is tell you a story about a particular project I worked on. It's actually related to the DfE and how a particular piece of research that we did actually changed government policy. So it was really, I mean, I learned a lot doing it. I think everyone else learned a lot doing it. It really, for me, brought home the power of user research and the whole user centricity, which has come through all of the talks we've heard today so far, which is great to hear. So, basically, so I'm going to a very quick slide about me in a second, and then a little bit about user research. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with it. Hopefully all of you will be. Just a little bit about kind of how we do it in government. When I say we, obviously I'm a freelancer, but having worked in government for years, I've seen a lot of this done across a lot of ministries and departments. And then I want to focus on the Get Help with Technology program, which was the DfE program we worked on. Basically, what we wanted to learn, kind of what we did, what we actually learned, which actually surprised us, and kind of what happened as a result of that. And then hopefully there'll be time for a few questions at the end. So a little bit about me, and I won't dwell on this. So as I said, I've been in UX for about 10 years. I did a psychology master's in Bristol a good few years ago now. A pretty picture on the top left is lovely Clifton. I worked in financial services for a couple of years, so doing quite a lot of digital stuff with HSBC and Experian. But latterly it's been very much more by kind of accident than design, but at government, so across a whole bunch of pretty major government ministries and departments. And what's continually interesting as I change is they all seem to think their problems are unique, but actually they're not. So the same problems crop up again and again, and the same challenges. User research, well, what is user research? Why do we do it? In essence, it's helping product teams kind of understand their users. And that, again, hopefully it's not a surprise to anybody. And the ultimate objective of this is to create products the users need and the users will actually use. The difference with government, unlike kind of the private sector, obviously in the private sector, if you want to buy some trainers, you've got dozens of different websites you can buy trainers from. If you want to pay your car tax or you want to book a coronavirus appointment, you have to go to the government. So there's an actual real need in government, particularly when you're building government services, to make sure those services meet the needs of users and all users. So digitally assisted users, users with accessibility needs. There's a whole strand of kind of considerations that you have to make. So it's about empathy, it's about understanding the users, it's about talking to them, it's about kind of going out to them. Obviously in pre-coronavirus days that was a lot easier, going out to where they are, watching them, shadowing them, kind of understanding what they need. And that's, to what Andy was saying earlier on about internal and external, it's internal teams as well as external. So by the users, there's obviously different types of users. So for example, at the moment, I'm working with the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office on a program. We're digitising a bunch of stuff for the British embassies around the world. And obviously the primary users are British citizens abroad who may be getting married or having problems. They might have lost their passport, et cetera, et cetera. But the secondary users are the embassy staff in post who are struggling with confused users, lots of paperwork, people who are kind of stressed out when they're abroad, they're trying to get home. So it's about having empathy for all of those different types of users. That's really critical. And critically, it's about learning before you build anything, if you can. So learn as much as you can, and I'll show you a couple of slides in a minute which hopefully kind of graphically explains this. Don't make that mistake of building stuff, putting it out there and hoping it works, because it's an expensive error. And ultimately, it's about reducing risk. All of this, this pretty fluffy stuff about talking to users, understanding their needs, we're doing it to stop products and services going live that don't meet needs, that waste money, that waste time, that basically lead to increased support challenges for organizations. So you've probably seen this graphic before. It's openly available on the web. Lots of digital teams in government blog on gov.uk, and it appears a lot in there. This is how, and GDS, the Government Digital Service, who kind of are the gatekeepers of digital excellence, if I can put it like that, across government. This is the process they mandate, is perhaps too strong a word, but they very strongly recommend that all digital services follow this. And interestingly, Andy from NatWest earlier, it resonated when he showed that kind of graphic. Broadly, it's doing a similar thing to what this is showing. So the idea being, you kind of start with the user needs. So the discovery phase is you're understanding what do your users want, who are your users, what do they need, what's the problem space? Before you show them any prototypes, before you show them anything, kind of what is the issue? What are you trying to solve? When you've done that, you then move into alpha, which is the experimentation phase. So you build disposable prototypes, paper prototypes. You can do rapid research, evaluating kind of let's try a bunch of different things, let's hypothesize, let's see if this stuff actually works. And then when you've done that and you've got a more stable idea of kind of what it is you actually want to build, you then start building it in beta. So you take more stable prototypes, more kind of fixed code, and you're iterating it and improving it through multiple rounds of research, putting it in front of users, making sure they are able to complete these journeys. And at each stage of these, and obviously after that comes live, when a service goes live, and this can happen over, depending on the service, weeks, months, years with large-scale digital transformation projects. And at the end of each of those stages, typically you have an assessment. So we had one, the team I was on a couple of weeks back, and you basically, it's a bit like a big 3 or 4 hour grilling, and the GDS assessment team will fire a bunch of questions at you. How did you work out what users you wanted to talk to? How did you identify their needs? What tech stack are you using? There's a whole bunch of stuff, and you have to pass each of those stages before you can go to the next one. And central to all of this is research and understanding your users. So just a few kind of photos from the album to kind of put a bit of color behind this. So this is discovery phase, you're going out and talking to your users, and obviously it's harder now, pre-COVID days. So that's me airside in Heathrow, the only time I've ever been in Heathrow next to a departure gate and I wasn't getting on a flight. When I was at the Department of Health, working in the overseas healthcare service, we were talking to, basically I was grabbing people at the gate. You can't get a much more captive audience than people waiting for a plane. They had nowhere else to go. And I was trying not to frighten them, asking them about kind of travel insurance, what their fears were about going abroad and getting ill and what they would do in that case. And we got a lot of really, really useful insight from that. And obviously, kind of, as we are now much more remote, this case, a lady kind of putting some current gov.uk pages in front of her and kind of getting feedback on marriage in Morocco in this case, bizarrely enough. This is just a gratuitous, I love this picture. This is what I call extreme UR. So you can see me on the right, my colleague Charlotte from GDS to the left. These 4 gentlemen around here are technology support workers. This is in the Javanese government building in Bandung, this was a GDS project I did a couple of years ago. We went to Indonesia as part of it to understand kind of technology, public sector procurement. And the gentleman there wearing the same colour shirt as me on the left, he was an interpreter. So I was trying to conduct a research session with these 4 gents through an interpreter in the government building, in the pouring rain. The monsoon was deluging down outside. And there were these sort of heavies at the back. I have no idea who they were. They turned up, they didn't smile, they didn't really look at us. I couldn't tell whether they were there to intimidate these gentlemen or to intimidate us. But it was challenging, but it was very useful nevertheless. And this is me in a taxi on the way to, because we also went to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur Airport. We got talking to cabbies about how they interact with the government and kind of get their license, etc., etc. So I was doing a bit of quick and dirty rapid research with him as we went to the airport, and he was very forthcoming, which was lovely. Then, once you've done all of that, again, it's almost a cliche, pictures of post-it notes. Obviously, these days, we do this digitally rather than face-to-face, but it's taking all of that good stuff and making sense of it. Kind of what are the themes coming out? What are you trying to learn? What are the users telling you? And using that to kind of inform your hypothesis and inform what it is you're building afterwards. And then sharing those insights. And again, it's that sort of oft-repeated GDS cliche that user research is a team sport, and I very much agree with that. This is the digital team I was working with at DFE, and same below. Bring everyone on board, get people to come and watch the sessions, get people to listen, get people to kind of do the analysis with you, so that you're not a sort of user research silo of one, you're part of a team and the team are coming with you. And it's particularly important, I found, with, for example, policy folks, because they have their heads down in government policy and guidance, and they kind of like, well, the policy's like this, people need to understand it, and you say, well, the users don't understand it, and you go round and round and round, then you bring them along to a user research session, and they see the user struggling, and they're like, okay, now I get it. So, team sport. And then in kind of communicating, obviously slide decks, presentations like that previous picture I showed you are useful, but in whatever way kind of you communicate. So visually, again, I'm sure this will be familiar to many, user experience map. So kind of trying to map, you see the feelings there, the larger graphic in the middle. At each step of a particular process, what's the user feeling, kind of what are they thinking, how can that help us improve the process from basically based on what we've learned. And then at the bottom here, this was a persona I produced based on a Ministry of Justice project I worked on a few years back. An example of a type of user, what are their pain points, what are their needs, who are we building this service for? And then once you've kind of done all that good discovery work, you're then into the alpha phase. So again, as I showed you before, it's creating essentially testable prototypes. So this is me in a DWP office in Sheffield, showing an early prototype we built to a civil servant. And that is a user testing lab in Southwark in London, where we brought some members of the public in and showed them some of the early stuff we were working on and basically got their feedback. And we had the team behind a one-way mirror watching and observing and taking notes. Yeah, very, very powerful and useful. And then into the beta phase. So this is where you're refining, you're iterating your designs, you've got a more stable product, you think, or the early parts of a product, and keep testing. I remember one project I came into, a few of the team were like, why do we keep doing these rounds of research? You know, we've never done this much research before. And I was like, we have to keep testing. So I try and make it a rule. I mean, we normally work in 2-week sprints. At least once a sprint, we put something in front of users. It doesn't matter what it is, but if you do that, you can check yourself and you can improve it as you're going. And again, to reiterate, I mean, the ultimate objective of all of this, in government and more broadly, you're trying to create user-centered products and services which meet the needs of those users. So that was the sort of preamble. What I want to get onto is the DFE project. So Get Help with Tech, which is a rather clumsy title, but that's what they went with. It was a rapid response program. So obviously as homeschooling started last year, as the country locked down and the kind of COVID madness began, it became very apparent very quickly that lots of children and families either didn't have the hardware required to homeschool or didn't have the connectivity to do so. So DFE and the government, and it's actually to its infinite credit, spun up this program, and a lot of us were pulled off other projects at great speed and put on this. And there were a bunch of things. So there was a kind of laptops and tablets team, so there was a kind of whole hardware digital team working on it. I was on the internet access, so the connectivity bit, along with Jack. And you were on Get Help with Tech.
Between laptops and the internet access.
Right.
I floated around.
Andy was floating between. But there was a whole bunch of people working across all of these. But what I want to talk about today is the internet, the connectivity side of things. So the original plan was to offer kind of 3 connectivity options to eligible families. So the first one was free Wi-Fi access. So there were about, I think, 15 to 20,000 vouchers available that schools could give out to eligible families. And those vouchers would give 6 months worth of internet access to the children in question, as long as they had access to the Wi-Fi hotspot. I won't name the provider, but it's a large household telco, shall we say. The second option was mobile data. So for families that the Wi-Fi didn't work, or what wasn't a viable option, or that the school decided they wanted to do this, they could request that the mobile provider, so it was typically it was O2, Virgin, and a few others, the parents could have their mobile data allowance boosted temporarily to give them more data to basically tether so they could still do homeschooling. And the third option was routers. So we had a whole bunch of thousands and thousands of Huawei routers and a couple of other brands that were sent out to the families. But I joined the program, this project, kind of a month or so into it, and I felt straight away that our understanding of the end users was lacking. So DFE's primary users, and it goes back to kind of who are the users that we've been talking about throughout today, are schools. It's very much a policy-driven organisation. They don't really deal with families and children and kind of this stuff. They put out policies, they deal with schools. So they built this lovely shiny portal where schools could order laptops, they could order connectivity, all of this good stuff. But the schools weren't going to be the ones using it. It was the families. And I was asking, well, what do we know about these families? And the answer was not an awful lot. We didn't really understand what the situation of these families was. We didn't understand their connectivity needs. So it became apparent pretty quickly that before we start rolling this stuff out nationwide, and we're talking, you know, a big operation involving a lot of people, we need to kind of do some research with them. So what do we want to find out? Well, I wanted to, and I kind of impressed upon the team, that we need to understand kind of how these different solutions perform in a real-world context. So let's try this stuff out before we start shipping it. And how do we do this? Well, basically I proposed, and I use I a lot here, but obviously it's a team effort, and Jack was very much working with me on this. We ran a series of diary studies. Now, I don't know if any of you have come across the term diary study. It's an ethnographic research technique that's been around for a long, long time. It's particularly helpful in terms of digital. We we were talking about Don Norman this morning. So the NN group is, Don Norman's kind of one of the founders of that. This is their definition of a diary study. So it's a research method. It's about collecting qualitative data. So you're not interested in analytics, performance data, that kind of stuff. It's people's real life feedback about their behavior, about activities, about experiences. And the key thing, it's over time. So it's not just like a 1 hour research session. You're saying over a period of a week, a couple of weeks, a month, how are you getting on with this thing, or how are you doing this particular thing? And you can prompt people to do it. So what we basically did was we found about 15 to 20 eligible families around the country, and that was key. We didn't want them in any single geographic area. And we gave each family one of the 3 options, and then we said to them, right, go and use it for 2 weeks. And we asked them to update it. So I pushed out, using Gov Notify, I was able to text them, because I had their mobile numbers. And I sent them a short message every couple of days saying, this is, so it wasn't coming from my phone, this is from DFE, thanks for taking part in the research, but basically, can you just fill in this form? And then we pushed them sent them a link to a very simple Google form, basically, how are you getting on with this? Just give us, think of an example where you went online with the hotspot, for example. What time of day was it? What room you were in? How was the experience for you? Anything else you want to tell us? And we did this every couple of days, and we gathered over the 2 weeks a whole raft of feedback, and it came into a Google spreadsheet that we were looking at. And before I get on to kind of what we learned, I just want to kind of introduce you to Angie and her daughter Rose. They are not real people, by the way, but the story is absolutely, this is a true story we heard. So Angie has a pay-as-you-go phone. She has about £15 a month she puts on the phone. And her daughter Rose is at primary school. The primary school were using an education platform like, let's say, Google Classroom, and they were pushing worksheets out to this and asking the children to go and do this. Now, Angie doesn't have internet at home. She has very limited data on her phone, so she was really struggling to kind of get online. So she was trying to use as little data as possible, getting online, downloading the worksheets that were being sent to Rose, screenshotting them. She was then emailing them to a friendly local newsagent and asking the newsagent to print them off, which he duly did. She would then bring them back. Rose would fill them out. She would take a picture of the filled out paper sheet, and then, with using as little data as possible, re-upload that back to the Google Classroom. And that's a true story. And these are the kinds of things we were hearing. And DFE, it blew their minds. They had no idea that this was what was going on. So I really wanted to share that, because I think it really focused everybody's minds. And the results were very revealing, because what we found was the users of the Wi-Fi hotspots consistently struggled, wherever they were in the country, whatever time of day it was, whoever was online, whatever device they were using, they couldn't use, they really struggled with the things. And the maps there it's color-coded, it's from the Wi-Fi provider's own website. Counterintuitively, red is the strongest Wi-Fi signal. So that's their own assumption. This is the Wi-Fi provider's assumption of, based on your postcode, whether you're likely to get a good signal or not. And you can see that a lot of our users were sitting in kind of green areas where there's lower signal. But even the user in the red area there, even they reported real challenges accessing it. And this was the kind of feedback we were getting. So I couldn't log in, connection dropped, I couldn't access the website. I had problems connecting every single evening between certain times. People couldn't get on. And one of the parents said, if I was trying to use this for work, it would be really annoying. So as these results came in and it started to kind of alarm us, we investigated further. So we did some more digging around, and this slide I'll thank Jack for, because he did a really nice piece of kind of desk research around this. We took as an example Leeds. And we looked at some of the kind of deprived areas of Leeds and some of the kind of more affluent areas. And using that same Wi-Fi checker tool, it was really striking to note the more affluent areas have far better Wi-Fi connectivity than the deprived areas. And we did a few more examples around the rest of the country, and this was a consistent pattern. And we shared these findings with the Wi-Fi providers. And depressingly, they actually weren't surprised at all. They said, this is what we expected, which was in itself slightly a difficult conversation to have. So what happened next? So basically, I took these insights back to DFE, back to the project team, and we discussed them. And we said, look, because this was obviously a pilot, it was a small scale, obviously the caveats were there was only a limited number of families. But we took the decision to remove the Wi-Fi hotspots from the program. So of the 3 options, Wi-Fi was gone. And that was a direct result of this research, because they realized that we'd done this, as I say, with a couple of dozen families. Before they made 20,000 hotspot vouchers available to families nationwide, that they were going to potentially have a deluge of support on their hands. To their infinite credit, they took this off the programme. And what it became obvious was, and it's kind of obvious when you think about it, that the families needed confidence when they used this particular product, that it wasn't just one person in the house online. Often we heard these families had 2, 3, 4 children. They were online simultaneously, unsurprisingly. They were in different rooms, they were on different devices, they were going online. It wasn't just homeschooling happening between 9 and 3. It was any time of the day, and often for sustained periods. But actually, what we'd showed was that the research had showed that it wasn't possible. It didn't meet their needs with the proposed Wi-Fi hotspots. So, what lessons can we draw? Well, in a nutshell, and I suppose the key takeaway from what I'm saying is talking to actual users have demonstrated that one of the proposed solutions, the other two had their limitations, but they tested much better, did not meet the needs of the users. And that hadn't been factored in earlier on, and it was only through doing this research that we were able to see that. So conducting that research with users as early as possible really kind of helped us properly understand their needs. And it prevented us from launching the wrong solution, so a kind of negative result was actually a positive. It saved taxpayers' money, and believe me, if you're working in government, saving taxpayers' money is always top of a lot of civil servants' agendas. And I think and I said this just now, but avoiding huge amounts of support. The prospect of lots of irate families contacting their schools who were already trying to deal with homeschooling and the nightmare of COVID last year would have been really challenging. And probably those schools would have come to DFE, and it would have been a kind of cascade effect. So it was really gratifying to see that. And this was a feedback from one of the policy designers on the team, and because she'd never really worked with user researchers and digital teams before, and she'd never seen anything like this. And she was sort of saying it was the rich feedback that it kept the whole team focused on kind of ensuring the offer met kind of what the outcomes were, what the objectives were of the policy. And I thought this was quite a nice one to finish on. This is from the mother of one of the families. She just said, it's a godsend. And she didn't realise how badly everyone relies on the internet, because they hadn't had internet at home up until this point. And she now said, I'm going to see if I can get someone. That was kind of top of her list. I'm going to go and talk to whoever I can to get internet in the house. Thank you very much. Tony.